Calling the roll, Mr. Gallagher. Here. Mr. Schwan.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
Mr. Jones.
Here.
Mr. Harrison.
Here.
Ms. Simon.
Here.
Mr. Greenspan.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Germana.
Here.
Ms. Connolly.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. We have perfect attendance. That's great. Has anybody signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
Okay, we're going to proceed to items referred to committee. And the first item is Resolution 2014-0268.
Resolution number 2014-0268, a resolution approving the Metro Health System year 2015 budget in accordance with Ohio Revised Code Section 339.06D, with the understanding that the allocation of county funds to the system will be made through adoption of the 2014-2015 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program annual update for 2015, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Okay, this resolution is before us because there is a requirement that we officially pass the Metro Health System budget. But as a matter of practice, we include the Metro Health subsidy within our general budget and budget update. Since we're not contemplating any change to the Metro Health subsidy for 2015, I did not ask Metro to make a formal presentation. But if anybody has any questions about the Metro Health budget, I would ask if they would share them at this time. Councilman Jones.
When you mentioned no change to the subsidy, I was under the impression that $40 million, there were some or requests about how that $40 million would be used. Is that correct? There's some conversation around the $40 million.
Are you talking about the construction program?
Yes.
I would ask if Ann Hill could come forward. I would say by way of preference that a number of options are being discussed as to the best ways to move forward on Metro Health's campus renovation project, and would ask if Ms. Hill has anything to add to that.
Ann Hill, Manager, Local Government and Community Relations at Metro Health. Yes, that's correct. We are in discussions about how to finance the transformation, and that financing could include some shifting of subsidy to capital, and for Metro Health, shifting of our capital funds to our operating budget. So if we, for instance, would not have the subsidy devoted to operating as it is now, we would use some of our capital money to fill that gap in our operating budget.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just as a chairman of the committee and someone who's been in a lot of these discussions, this is all just under discussion, and when we, we'll have our biennial budget hearings in the fall, and of course there'll be a lot of discussion between now and then. But the fact that a lot of ideas and have been floated should not indicate to anyone that there have been decisions made or that anyone is close to making significant changes or different in the way that we operate presently with Metro. But because of the transformation proposal, there have been lots of discussions and a lot of ideas have been floated around, but that's what they are, they're ideas.
Any further questions or comments? Is the budget resolution, does that need to be passed at the November 25th council meeting, or would it be sufficient if it were passed at the December 9th meeting?
It could be passed at the December 9th meeting.
Okay, in that case,
Mr. Chairman.
yes.
As long as we have Ms. Hill up there. There was some presentations, I think, from Dr. Boutros indicating that they would not be needing our subsidy this year, and that would be in tying with future requests to move away from our subsidy and moving it into a capital type program. What is the status of the actual need for the subsidy this year?
Just to clarify that, it was not this year, and it was specifically around the operating budget itself, I think beginning in 2016, and that was the same question I was trying to respond to Councilman Jones on, that it's a question of if we were to do some shifting between capital and operating. So that was the statement that he made, that it wouldn't be needed by 2016 in the operating, with the assumption that it was going to be devoted to capital to help with debt repayment.
No, that's not what I recall. I recall that there would not be the need for the operating. Then there was a desire, if that need was not there, would we consider moving it to capital? That's a different statement than you making the determination, or Metro making the determination as to where the funds rely. It was a statement that the efficiencies and the improvements in the operations had improved to the point where the operational subsidized funds were not going to be necessary. Then there was a request saying, in the event that we got to that point, would we consider using those same dollars for capital? That's a different statement than what I think I just heard you say.
I think it would be, well, I can repeat what I just said, but maybe it would be more useful if our Vice President for Finance, who is at a FEMA training this week, would meet with those members of the council who are interested in digging deeper into this.
Yeah, I'm just curious as to whether or not we phased out the need for the subsidy.
No,
100%?
not today.
Okay,
Not this year.
What is
Not
the
this year.
percentage of, because it?
I don't know.
I
don't know the answer to that.
I had the impression it was trending down to the point where it would not be necessary, that the improvements and efficiencies had continually improved.
With the assumption that we could free up some of our capital budget if we needed to for operating, because the original idea was that the 40 million would be used for debt repayment on a large bond.
Boy, I guess we're remembering it differently. I remember it that your efficiencies had improved.
They
that
have,
and
yes,
that
sir.
we would not be necessarily funding the operation piece. Then there was a secondary request that because you're not asking for those operational funds, would we then consider a capital contribution? Not that it was an either or.
And if I can just kind of
Just the way I recall.
And I'll say this to kind of harmonize what I'm hearing. What Jack heard is really what I heard as well. That was the statement that Boutros made, at least the way I took what he said. But it was also in the context of capital improvement.
Mm-hmm.
So even though he didn't say it, like Jack said, he didn't say it, what I heard was he didn't need the 40 million. I inferred from all of that there was some shifting of that 40 million from operating to capital in some strategic, creative way, which have not agreed to yet. Nothing has been agreed to, but certainly was a conversation. And if as Jack said, that's what was said, is he moving away from that statement or clarifying it so that it's more in line with what you said today? Is he ready to?
I'm happy
is he
to
ready
take your
say it?
concerns back to Dr. Boutros and to Craig Richmond, our Vice President for Finance, and ask them to clarify for you.
Okay, what I would like to move the legislation along to second reading, but I would also like to ask if you could, either yourself or Mr. Richmond, if you could come back to our meeting on December 2nd. which is when we're going to adopt the amendments to the budget, and that would be a time when we could also get an update on, and I'd like it to be narrowly focused in answering the question as to where exactly are we in the need for operating subsidy in 2015.
We'd be happy to do that, Councilman.
Mr. Chair, if I could ask that that be done in a cash flow statement so we can actually see the flow of funds as to the projection. And I just have a hard time believing it's an either or, that it starts one day and all of a sudden the very next day became so efficient you don't need $40 million. I would like to think that taxpayers would not anticipate that that's the kind of operating budget we're looking at.
We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Okay? Hearing nothing else, is there a motion to refer Resolution 2014-0268 to the full council for a second reading on November 25th, and then the final reading would be on December 9th?
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the resolution is so referred, but as the resolution so states, it's with the understanding that the actual allocation of subsidy takes place through the budget update, which is the next item on our agenda. Ms. Janine.
Resolution number 2014-0267, a resolution adopting the 2014-2015 biennial operating budget and capital improvements program annual update for 2015, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Okay, thank you very much. The first thing I'd like to do is if I could call forward Director Tewan. And we're in the section now where we're continuing the questions and answers regarding the budget overview. And on page 6 of Director Murray's budget overview, there was an item under Central Services, which is an item for $3.2 million in 2015. And it says, increase to provide for all building operating contracts and the archive's new space. And I would just like if you could provide us some further detail on what that 3.2 million consists of, and whether it reflects costs being higher than anticipated, or change in operating conditions, or what led to these circumstances, and whether this is something that's ongoing or whether it's something that's more one-time in nature.
Thank you. Bonnie Tewan, Director of Public Works. What this is basically just looking at a snapshot of a portion of the picture that we have before us. In general, our budget is pretty consistent with what we had from previous years. Though in this particular line item, there might be an increase. There were decreases in other line items, which really gave us a net similar to what we had before. This $3 million actually kind of started back in 2012, where we had substantially low personnel cost. That got transferred to 2013 and was raised hold on, I gotta make sure I get my years right. I'm sorry, 2013, we had a pretty slim personnel cost. And that was moved forward to 2014, increased slightly, but not to the levels that we needed to be. In addition, there were utility costs, particularly for this building, that were not assumed for this building. So it's an adjustment into those additional costs. So it's a combination of additional personnel cost, and utility costs that weren't accounted for in this building that need to be carried over. But the net, because we've had savings in other areas, by way of example, there was close to $1 million savings that was overestimated for our overtime for our trades. And then there was an additional $1 million overestimated for contracts that, as we're looking at them for this year, we've cut out about a 900,000 of contracts. So if you look at all of our budget in general, we're pretty close to where we were last year. It's just, we're making adjustments within Public Works.
The contracts that were eliminated, what kind of things did those consist of?
And it wasn't, it's not necessarily contracts that are eliminated, but contracts that the costs are being reduced.
Like the custodial.
Supplies.
Supplies,
The
yeah.
custodial supplies, I think uniforms, there were a reduction in the uniforms cost.
Over 200,000 in the custodial supplies.
Kendra's out.
Kendra Zuzi, Public Works. Over 200,000 was saved on a custodial contract for supplies. Just the need went down as we reduced buildings, and some of it was the contract wasn't being utilized, that encumbrance. So they were buying supplies not on the contract.
Director, now that we're in operation in this building, do we have an update on whether in fact we're achieving the operational savings that we anticipated through the consolidation, and if so, what the annual number is on that?
I don't have those numbers before me right now. Assuming that we've been here for 6 months, we can make some projections, keeping in mind the savings for consolidating multiple buildings. So when we get to the consolidation of our processing center, that will also help with those fees. But I can give you an update as far as where we were before with all of our leases to the building, to the departments that have moved into this building, and our cost and expenses for this building.
Okay, I would appreciate if you could get that to us and get back to us.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for Director Tewan? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now we remain in item number 1. It's the question is whether anyone has any further questions regarding the general overview before we start hearing the individual departments.
Chair.
Yes.
You're talking about the book that we just got?
It could include that, yes.
Okay. In the short amount of time I've had to review it, my questions are limited to only 72. So,
That's going to take 24 rounds.
yeah. I do have a couple questions. Is Mr. Parks, is he not here? Fiscal? Mr. Murray is, okay. Yeah. Are you,
Good afternoon, Council.
are you going to be addressing these, or is the fiscal officer?
I will be addressing them.
Okay. So, Council President's asking the question, why is he?
Is there a reason why he's not here?
I believe he's working on another matter, so.
We have a whole council of the whole here. We have issues regarding the finances, and he is not here. That's a problem.
Okay, I'll let that dramatic pause. I'll now begin. The, just, once again, we just got this. They're still warm. So, looking at the just starting on page 1, on page 1-1, or I-1, property tax revenue shows an 8.5% decrease from 13 to 15 is the statement. But when I go to page I-6 and I look at the table, the all funds budget revenue, it shows actually property taxes from 13 actual to 15 budget is actually up 16%. Can you address why there's a discrepancy? Maybe I'm reading it wrong. but it looks like we went from 326 million in 13 to 379 in 15,
The,
which is an increase.
on page I-6, the property tax revenue is on an all funds basis. So that includes the general fund, Health and Human Services levy fund, as well as the Board of Developmental Disabilities. So the increase would assume, in this case, there's additional property tax revenue that we are expecting from the Board of Developmental Disabilities. There are some differences in the way they classify their intergovernmental revenues and property taxes. There are differences, longstanding differences in the way we classify the revenue. So that could account for a portion of it. We're not expecting much of an increase in property tax revenue for the general fund operating because our debt schedule is slightly higher in the next few years. And as you know, property tax revenue by law goes to the debt service fund first.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure.
The next item talks about a one-time property tax revenue for debt service. So shows a one-time inflow of 15. What was that one-time inflow? And it was in 14.
Right. I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to have to research that. That might be an error. That might be an error.
Okay. I noted on the sales tax, we know from last week's discussion, we talked about a 3% annual growth rate.
Yes.
And it looks like it's growing at 3.1, is that correct? Was that the actual year over year? 13 to 14 growth rate?
13 to 14, that might have been, yeah, 3.1%. We're using 3.3% as a parameter
Okay.
for our discussions.
Okay, in the next item talks about a $7.5 million increase in syntax. That's another one-time, you classify it as a one-time item,
Correct.
correct? And we talked last week about possibly putting together schedules that showed extraordinary items. If we're showing a $4.6 million general fund surplus, correct, for
Correct.
14,
Correct.
are we saying that if that one-time increase wasn't in place, that we would have had an operating deficit?
You can make that inference, yes.
Okay.
But I would also say that the projection for estimated expenses, again, is an estimate. So if I'm slightly high on projected expenses, it could be a wash.
Right, right. Well, this is why, going back to our discussion about having a category of extraordinary items, so we could see
Sure.
from operations, this would obviously, and the 15 million above very well may be another one-time item. Added together, it's 22 million, 22.5 million could be of one-time items, which would be nice to have classified out separately. I've got other questions, but I can defer if my colleagues have other questions.
Okay, we'll see if other colleagues have questions. It's pretty difficult.
Okay. If I can continue, then, because just in general, casino revenue is not represented in here at all, correct? The revenue or any outflows?
The revenue is in the all funds, not in the general fund. So the all fund schedules includes the casino tax revenue. The general fund operating does not.
And, okay, so if the revenue's in there, then what's the outflow look like? What's the projected outflow? If the inflow is 9.75, or what is the outflow?
At this point, the projected surplus the projected remaining cash for the casino revenue tax fund is about 750,000
In 15, is that 15's projection?
through 14.
Okay, what is 15 though? 15,
Well-
the revenue's included?
Well, 15, the casino tax revenue, there's the projects are, they're appropriated as they come to council and as they come to the executive. So There's no plan. I don't have a plan for. I don't have an operations plan for the casino revenue tax. What I do is I show you the estimated revenue. You've got the cash balance, and then the department will bring us the deal as it materializes.
So then the revenue's included, but there's no expense.
At this point,
So if we were looking at that, kind of twisting the matching concept of accounting, then our revenue then is as well, or our net is overstated by whatever the inflow is. Meaning we're not matching revenue and expenses.
it's not overstated because we haven't appropriated it.
You haven't appropriated the expense, but you recorded the revenue.
I don't have an idea what the appropriation amount should be.
So we have no, so there's, then the question is, there's no casino revenue
There is an idea, excuse me, Mr.
Yeah.
Greenspan, there is an idea because 3 pieces of legislation have been submitted to this council, totaling $8.5 million.
But it's not in the budget yet. And
No,
it's
when
not
you said
been
you don't have an
requested.
idea, though,
It's
I
not
guess
been requested. Well, I don't know if the projects have been approved. If they're just getting to council, I don't know if they've been approved. So there is an opportunity to amend the budget. But at this point, based on what I have, there are no appropriations at this point for 2015 for casino revenue tax fund.
that I would agree with, but to say you have no idea about the request is to say that we don't recognize that $8.5 million has been requested.
But requested is not approved.
Okay, I guess I'm just finding fault with saying I have no idea what the requests amount to, and we know clearly what the requests amount to.
And this goes back to the philosophy, unfortunately, of us reporting only in a cash basis, because what are we projecting in 14? I can drive this point home. What are we projected in 14 as our net? It's 4.6 million is a net general fund surplus.
Correct.
Oh, I'm sorry, but you're saying casino revenue is not in the general fund.
Correct.
So what is the all funds? What are we looking at, all funds? A surplus or a deficit?
The all fund surplus projected for 2015,
No, 14.
14 is $576.7 million
$500 million surplus?
for all funds.
Okay. Then I would argue that we're $10 million heavy, because if we only record on a cash basis and we know that those casino monies are not leaving this year, the bank account this year, correct? The cash has come in, but the money's not leaving because we are a cash basis reporting entity.
There may still yet be some obligations that actually hit the books for casino revenue tax. They're in consideration for the finance committee.
Okay. I think Mr. Schron and I are on the same page here on this one. On the HHS levy fund, what is the, I know we have an opportunity to use PA dollars as well as HHS levy reserves. What's the philosophy, and how do you determine which to use, of whether to use HHS levy reserve dollars or PA dollars?
The philosophy that we have worked with is that we would, if we can, we will spend PA dollars on one-time expenditures. So the goal is to extend the cash balance of the Health and Human Service levy for as long as possible, because obviously that is something that we would have to take back to the voters if this fund ever runs short. So in this particular, for 2015, we're expecting to use about $11 million of PA reserves. That offsets the cash needs for the HHS levy. And what it does, it allows us to pay for the one-time, the increased subsidy that was given in 2015 for the Adams-Bohr and for Metro. So it does not affect the cash balance. And then there are also some hardware and software that was appropriated last year during the amendment process.
Okay.
So I'm covering all of that.
Okay. In the HHS levy fund, it also states in the last paragraph on 1.3 that there are no new programs included. So are you saying the pay for success has already been contemplated in the 2015 budget?
Yes, it has.
Okay, so when we say no new, you meaning no new items in that specific fiscal year?
Well, part of the criteria for the 2015 budget was any approved programs in 2015 that have an annual impact. In the case of Pay for Success, the impact is over 5 years.
Part of the bonding discussion that we had last week talked about setting aside $3.5 million a year for R&R reserves.
Correct.
Is that contemplated anywhere in this budget?
It is not, it's in the cash balance. I'm covering it by, if you go back to the Schedule 1, looks like this. If you look under Global Center Operating Reserve, and if you look at 2014 third quarter projection, 2015 final budget, 2016 final budget, and 2017, the $14.8 million, that is your excess revenue over and for the 0.25% sales tax, the CVB payments, the 1% bed tax. That revenue was earmarked for the medical mart and for the hotel. At this point, our revenues exceed the obligations for the hotel and the medical mart and the operating payments for the Global Center by $14.8 million in 14 and then so forth. So in the cash, we show it in the cash flow model as a debt cash flow model as a $3.5 million subsidy. Can that be higher? That's a policy decision, policy question that we will wrestle with in 2015. But we have the resources right now to cover a cash reserve. And again, we are not recommending that we place it in a separate fund. It's in the general fund to maintain flexibility for the executive and for council.
Okay. On page I-4.
Did you say 5-4?
I-4.
I-4. Sorry, 4.
Just kind of going page by page. It's just not a very quick reader, so that's only as far as I was able to read through the first 15 minutes when I received this report. It talks about 2% inflationary parameter,
Correct.
but in the information we received last week, 1.75 was used. Is there a difference, an explanation for the difference?
The inflationary parameter
I have them up in my office.
was 2%.
All right, I'll get back to you. I
Okay.
recall it being 1.75.
Okay.
And I believe that's as far as I got so far.
Okay, we have Ms. Conwell and then Councilman Tron.
Through the chair to Mr. Murray, the PA utilization funds, $12.7 million. If I'm recalling right from last budget cycle, I thought that was going to be a lower amount. I thought it was going to, we were actually, for the general fund, we were moving a lot of programs into the general fund, and I thought that would reflect more in what our PA utilization would be for this year.
Yes.
And also, where would that breakdown be in this book?
The utilization, there's a report on II-10. It shows the Health and Human Services levy utilization. We have increased, we are recommending an increase to the 2015 PA reserve use, for want of a better term. And again, we're trying to cover the $9 million increase to the two outside boards. Since as of right now, it's not in 2016 or 2017, we can cover it with our public assistance cash. So what that really means is that instead of the public assistance funds are funded two different ways. The state and federal revenue comes into this PA fund, as well as the local Health and Human Services levy. If we reduce our Health and Human Services levy subsidy, which is what we're in effect saying what we're proposing here, then that frees up money for other needs. But then all that does is that pulls down the remaining cash balance in the public assistance fund. Now we've got that fund. That fund has accumulated over the years because we got TANF dollars. So that it's sitting there. And we
It's
need
sitting
we
there,
need to
but
use
if
it.
we keep using it, eventually it'll go away. So
Eventually, I agree. But so it's a prudent use of it. I mean, right now, we began the year with about a $40 million cash balance in the public assistance fund.
I mean, I followed some of that, what you're saying, but I'm just going back, before this HH levy, the new one was passed, the administration started moving a lot of stuff over to the general fund and out of the HHS fund, because they didn't know if the levy was gonna pass or not. So once the levy passed, was everything moved back, or did they, to my understanding, certain things were still gonna stay in the general fund?
Correct.
So where are those, is there a breakdown somewhere in this book, other than double I-10, that lists that? Because this all looks like HHS. So what got moved from HHS over to the general fund? I believe it was juvenile court expenses. It was a couple things, but I don't remember in detail what exactly was moved over, all that was moved over.
We could certainly give you a breakdown. I mean, one of the things that moved that was moved from the levy fund to the general fund was the witness victim subsidy. It's still in the general fund. It's being subsidized, but the general fund picks up the subsidy now as opposed to the Health and Human Services levy. There actually weren't that many areas moved, quite frankly. We can certainly give you a list of when we made the cutoff, so to speak.
But you remember those discussions?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
And Ms. Conwell, your recollection is correct that the juvenile court expenses were a large portion of that. Councilman Schran.
Chairman, and again, with the same proviso that Mr. Greenspan, and I know my other colleagues, having just received these, so we're going to give our best shot to make some questions or queries on it. Your property tax revenue indicated a decrease of 8.5%. Is that on page 1.1? And so
For the general fund.
that's correct.
Yes, for the general fund operating it. That's correct. Again, if property tax revenue comes in, the money that the general fund operating receives is driven by the long-term general obligation debt.
So we're forecasting an 8.5% decrease.
We're forecasting 8.5% decrease to the general fund portion, not to the long-term GO, which gets the majority of the property taxes.
Okay, and that same decrease is going to be reflected every place where you're reflecting revenue. Is that what you say on 4.1? So we should anticipate that. On your revenue estimates are based upon trends used in 2014, 2016, the completion of the second quarter revenue. Modification trends will be employed where necessary. So I assume that we're going to use that same 8.5 where necessary.
Yes.
So even though you make reference to only being in the general fund, you're going to use the same assumption every place.
Well, the general fund this particular bullet is for the general fund operating.
Right.
So
The assumption is what I'm asking about the assumption because it talks about the assumption of property values continually eroding. Is that correct?
Based on the information that I have at this moment, yes.
Okay, so that's just, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
All I'm doing is reading what I saw on 4 pages
Okay.
as it goes forward. And then I think Mr. Greenspan's question about the inflation of the 2% parameter is applying to the contracts that was being applied, not necessarily to the overall budget, which was the 1.75 that you had presented to us last week. So those are two separate assumptions, at least as I'm understanding it. One place, you're assuming the inflationary parameter is a 2% on on page 4.1. And then what you presented to us was an additional assumption of a 1.75 last week.
Well, I'm looking at my presentation, page 3. I have a 2% inflationary factor for other operating contracts and expenses.
Right.
The expenses are commodities.
Right. And last week, you also had a carrying cost of 1.75 for additional inflationary impact that you presented to us for all categories. It's not, you won't find it on this sheet of paper. That was what you presented to us last week. And I think that's where Mr. Greenspan's coming from with his 1.75. I just,
I don't see it in the presentation, Councilman.
from last week?
From last week, I don't see it in the presentation.
Okay, I'll present it to you afterwards.
Okay.
You also have an assumption that employers' share of health costs based on expenditures adjustments. Is that a dollar amount or a percentage that you are making on, again, page 1.4, bullet 2, in summary of budget updates, adjustments to employer share? Please tell us what those adjustments were. Were they a dollar amount or a percentage?
This is a $2.7 million increase.
Okay, so that was a fixed dollar amount
Correct.
as a result of what was driving that?
That's a 3% hospitalization assumption.
Okay,
an
so was it-
increase in hospitalization on the employer side of 3%.
Okay, so it was an assumption of 3%, and then you applied it against the total, and then that resulted in another dollar amount.
The $2.7 million is the total for the.
Right, but that was a yield of 3% of previous expenditures. Is that, I'm just trying to get.
Yes.
Just trying to get how you got to the.
Yes.
How you got the numbers.
Gotcha.
Whether the numbers
I'm with
drove the calculation where you actually came up with a dollar calculation, you took a percentage and applied it against some other thing.
Correct.
So you're anticipating, I just want to get to why the assumptions are valuable, because if healthcare costs are only being projected at 3%, I think that's a dangerous place to be, because there's nothing that indicate that healthcare is only going to go up 3%.
Well, again, we have a robust cash balance in the employee wellness fund. So we don't, because of the cash balance that we carry, we wouldn't necessarily increase, say, at a higher amount, because we've got this cash balance.
Okay, so if you're not increasing it based on actual cost, then we're subsidizing it someplace. We're taking it out of a reserve.
We're not. It's in the employee cash balance. It's in the fund right now.
I understand, but if costs are going up higher than 3%,
But if I continue to do that and I ignore the cash balance, then wouldn't I be increasing my employer health costs more than I need to?
all I'm asking is what was your assumption? If your assumption is that their costs are only going to go up 3%, then I agree with you 100%. If they're going to go up 7 to 8 or 9%, which is what other trends are showing, then we are actually subsidizing those cost increases through our fund balance.
We're subsidizing. I wouldn't use. I would say we're covering it. We're covering it.
Offsetting it by-
We're offsetting it. I would say we're offsetting it
If the
because
costs
subsidizing
exceed-
it
Yeah.
makes me think we're expending resources that we don't need to, which I don't. I wouldn't agree with.
I just want to understand, your assumption is that our healthcare costs are going to go up 3% because that's all we're rebuilding the monies that are going into our reserves.
We are budgeting a 3% increase because of the fact that we have the cash balance. We don't think that we need to increase the employer share more than 3%.
I would just comment that the reason why we have the large fund balances in the past there's been years where the costs were less than what we actually bill people for. Is that correct?
That can also happen as well.
And so we're balancing it off a little bit by, as the director says, offsetting, as the councilman says, subsidizing, but whatever it is.
I just try to get the assumption as to what the healthcare costs are going to go up, and you can then make a conscious decision. You're only going to put 3% in, but if they're going to go up at a different rate, we should know that.
Mr. Chair,
Councilman Germana.
isn't a large portion of our health insurance self-insured,
Yes,
and it's based on claims?
yes.
So when we're saying 3%, if you've got rates from regular insurance companies, they're going up 7-8%. But this is based on what our actual costs are. And if we've got the large, we set the money aside, it's all based on what the health claims are in a large part. So that's why it doesn't go in sync with what the carriers are increasing it.
My only question was is that an assumption or was that the actual claims? And I didn't hear that was the claims. That was the assumption we were going to apply 3%.
So Councilman Schron, through the chair to Councilman Schron, hopefully I could, kind of give you some direction on that. What the director is saying is that we have a large cash balance for the self-insurance fund. The goal for our funds is not to continue for them to grow. So the assumption is that with the 3% increase that is being used, that will provide enough money in that fund to cover the cost, but not continue to increase that fund. So if the actual increase is 7%, if we were to budget 7%, we just keep growing this fund of money that is to be used for the insurance. So therefore, by us estimating a lower amount, we're not decreasing the fund totally, but we're not continuing to grow it. So eventually that fund will start to go down and true up to what the actual expenses are. So it's not that the budget amount, what we're budgeting, the 3% is the money that's going into the fund to pay for the claims, et cetera.
Director, how much is in the self-insurance fund now?
About 27 million.
And Director, let's follow the Schron assumption for a moment, and if our actual experience in 2015 was that we assumed an increase of 3% of cost, but the actual claims increased by 7%, then how much of that 27 million would we use up to cover that difference?
Hi. Good afternoon. I'm sorry to interrupt. I heard what was going on while I was sitting in my office, so I grabbed a document that I had emailed you all earlier regarding the healthcare fund and the healthcare costs. And I thought that it would be helpful if I brought that forward now.
And could you introduce yourself just for our listening audience that's out
Sorry,
there?
Lisa Durkin from the Department of Human Resources. I believe the question, how much we have in the fund, currently we do have, actually I calculate a little bit less than 27 million, but that is around there. If you recall, because of our self-insured status, we are mandated by the Internal Revenue Service to keep a reserve. The reserve that we're mandated to keep for 2014 is 7.7 million. I haven't received that number for 2015 yet. Every year that is calculated based on the claims payout average of a number of the previous years, so it changes year to year, but I expect it to not be very much different than it was this year. So around 7 or 8 million is the reserve that we are required to keep in the hospitalization self-insurance fund at any given time. So in excess of that, we do try to offer the most quality health care that we can
And what was the amount of the experience for last year?
For 2013, our experience was 66.9 million. For 2014, we're projecting 73.9 million.
Okay, so $7 million increase in the experience.
Correct. We are projecting for 2015 74.6 million. But of course, these are just our projections. We do find a little bit of savings with some transferring of the membership based on our open enrollment numbers, but as you know, those can change on a monthly basis. So that's what we're showing right now.
Okay, so the experience was more than twice what we're actually putting into this. We're talking about 3.75, and the experience increase was $7 million. It was almost twice what it was. And it's okay.
Yes.
I just would love to hear what the facts are, that it was not $3 million increase, it was almost $7 million.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Okay. And then if I'm understanding your facts, we only need to carry $7 million in the reserves based on the IRS guidelines.
For 2014.
Yeah, based on current experience.
Correct. I don't expect that to change much for 2015.
So we
correct.
have over $20 million in excess in those funds right this moment.
That is what the projection is.
Right. So one question this panel might ask is why put anything in if we already have excess funds that we could be utilizing someplace else in our budgets? Why put any of the three plus million if it's not necessary for IRS guidelines?
Certainly. Well, for some of that, we do programming, such as flu shots and the wellness fairs that we put on for employees. We do programming. As you know, we do lunch and learns. We do the Vitality program. We do these sort of things. So that is spent out of those funds as well. The other thing, though, to mention is that every year we're drawing down on those funds. So by trying to keep ahead of the inflation, ahead of any bad claims we might have in a year, we are seeing a drawdown. We did not have this kind of a cash balance, say, in 2011, which helped make the decision to go to a deductible plan, was because we were seeing such a drawdown on the fund balance. Now we're stable, and we're showing we're stable through 2017. But still, I don't feel a comfort level in spending those funds and then having nothing to rely on for employee programming.
I'm not really concerned about what the right, if IRS gave us a guideline, that's a guideline, we have 350% more than what the guideline is.
Correct.
And we don't have that in any other reserves within the county with 350% times that. So I'm just.
Well, yes, you're correct. But also, again, we are looking to administer a wholly rounded benefits administration program for our employees. So that would be where some of that has to come from.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Germano.
I think we got to remember, there's so many employees involved here that, our claims have been running okay. And it wouldn't take too many employees with some catastrophic illnesses, cancer, heart attacks, whatever, to really drive it up, because I think we only buy insurance on the aggregate, not on the specific loss. So, I mean, it wouldn't take much if you had some catastrophic losses to eat away that reserve. So, and I think it's wise to keep the larger reserve balance, just in case we have a tremendously bad year.
We do have insurance for very large catastrophic cases, so that helps provide some protection.
I think it's on the aggregate, not on the specific.
The specific as
Does?
well.
Okay.
It does.
All right.
Individual cases over something like 300,000 or something, we get them covered.
It's self-insured through a third party.
Stop loss, right.
Look forward to this tomorrow.
And certainly, we do have the catastrophic insurance on the individual for $275,000. And last year, we were able to procure it on the prescription drugs as well. We had one prescription drug that was costing in excess of $600,000 per year, so now we do have the catastrophic on that as well.
Okay, that's good. Any other questions?
Mr. Chair.
We do need to move soon to the departments, but Councilman Greenspan is next.
I agree. This is more of a somewhat of a philosophical question. So when we talk about property taxes, and where the statement is that that the general fund's 8.5% less, but if you look at the combined aggregate of all funds, we're 16%. And if you look at the general fund and the HHS levy fund as it relates to property taxes, the variance is effectively a wash. So the increase relates to the Department of Developmental Disabilities, correct? Is that the?
Yes. Again, we're talking about the classification of revenues. So
Right.
in total, the property tax for the BODD and the intergovernmental, in total, they should be about the same, but they classify their revenues slightly differently than we do. And it's a difference that we've discussed with the board at length, but it hasn't been an issue.
But we don't have any authority over their budget.
No, we do not.
All right. And if one was to look at these financial statements and see a 16% increase in property tax revenue, without having that knowledge that we don't control the Department of Developmental Disabilities budget, one might assume that we have that flexibility within our budget, correct? Which we don't.
Which we don't.
How is it?
They're in the schedules, but there's no.
Right, but we have no authority over
None.
that. And is that are those the three buckets, the general fund, the HHS, and Department of Developmental Disabilities? What's the fourth?
Long-term general obligation debt.
Okay, long-term GO debt. Three of those, we have some form of, had some form of control. I say had because the GO debt obviously has been pledged, so it's committed. The largest component is the Department of Developmental Disabilities, which we don't have any authority or control or any discussion over.
Right.
How is it, if I'm looking at it and I look at the financial statements and the discussion is that we're trending all funds ahead of year over year, we're seeing year increases. That's not really a factual statement it's a factual statement, but it's not a ideologically true statement as it relates to the control of the county. Is there in the narrative somewhere where, I'm trying to clarify so people understand, that's why I'm talking about these extraordinary items being listed, these clarifying notes, that the largest single component, and maybe it's broken down in a separate table, the four elements that make up, like that, the four elements that make up, I went four like this, that make up the property tax component with a caveat that we don't control the largest single component. Is that
We can certainly add that to the narrative. That's a salient point.
Okay.
I agree. We can do that.
All right, then I don't have any other questions.
Councilman Jones.
Thank you. And I'll make this brief. I know we've just gotten the book, and I don't qualify that good or bad because we're gonna dealing with this over several days and weeks. So, and I'll need time to look at it. So I'll just ask some basic questions. How much do you anticipate in revenues for next year, for 2015?
Are you talking about you want general fund or all funds?
All funds.
All funds is 1.3 billion.
Okay, 1.3. And the expenditures for that same year, 2015?
The expenditures is 1.33 billion. So it's balanced.
It's balanced, okay. And that represents general fund and health and human service funds combined.
Correct.
Will there be, let's take each one, on the health and human service fund, will there be an increase or decrease in expenditures for next year?
All right, for the Health and Human Services Levy Fund, it's 234.9 million, slightly less than the 2014 budget,
Okay, so we'll be spending slightly less.
slightly less.
I assume there've been conversations in the days and weeks around the budgets and potential additional expenditures from all of the departments we're gonna hear from. As you've approved them or not approved them, my question to you is, has there been a conversation with the incoming administration around those expenditures as well? In other words, as the new administration comes in, has there been any conversation with them about what those expenditures may be? And again, that's just in the context of, when we first came in, there was a previous government, and they wanted opportunity to have their imprint on the incoming. So I'm speaking in the context of the new government. What opportunities have they had to have an imprint or just a look-see into the budgets of these departments that we're going to hear from as they're responding to the current administration, but at the same time, they're gonna have to meet the needs of the incoming administration. So long question, but I'll take a grab at it.
All right, through the chair to Councilman Jones, we have shared the budget information with the incoming administration, but there have not been any detailed discussions on that yet. So at this point, as you know, we completed the information today. The information has been shared, and we'll have a discussion moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I appreciate all the questions, and I know that we just received the budget books, and under some circumstances, I might suggest that we provide another opportunity for questioning by having an additional committee of the whole before the next council meeting. But I suggest, I intuitively feel I don't think people really want that, so instead I would encourage whoever has additional questions to please direct that to finance within the next couple days, and I would appreciate if you would copy me so that I know what the questions are as well, and I will assist you in ensuring that the questions are answered in a timely fashion so that we can get those questions answered. So with that, we're going to move on to our departments, and we're going to try to do a few departments, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll finish the rest of it. And the first on the list is the Sheriff's Department. And in your presentations, I would ask everybody to please be brief, and also to focus on those changes that are in the 2015 update. And if you're requesting any funding that's not included in the 2015 update, please be sure to identify those requests that would require appropriation that's not in the proposal that we have before us. Mr. Cologne, on behalf of the Sheriff's Office.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Roberto Colon, Deputy Chief of Staff. For those listening, I am not the sheriff. Sheriff Bova is actually on mandatory in-service, receiving the credit hours that he needs to be able to remain the sheriff, and he couldn't get out of those mandatory hours. So he had asked that I come in and do give you guys an update as requested.
We were advised of that in advance and appreciate those things need to be done. Please proceed.
So this is what at least the sheriff had asked, at least what was directed from him to be able to provide an update on some of the regional jail projects and how they affect the prisoner board and care and where we're heading. So that's what, I just have one page on each. And all of these topics, just we've spent many meetings at the Public Safety and Justice Affairs Committee. So they're topics that may be new to some members up here, but not necessarily new for those that participate in the Public Safety and Justice Services Committee. So first, give an update on the Euclid Jail project. That's the one we ran into a little bit of challenges early on. Those challenges you'll see in the next slide, which really relate to prisoner board and care. But in the 14, we have what we will have is 5 months. We took over August 1st of the Euclid Jail. We have 25 employees assigned to that project, currently housing 60 prisoners. It took us a few months to get to that number. And in August and September, we had very little inmates in there, and it wasn't until October that the sheriff started putting some folks out there. And so we were pretty much about 90% staffed in August and September, but we didn't have nearly the amount of inmates because we weren't ready in a position to accept those. So it got off to a little bit of a rocky start. The budget for the Euclid Jail project really comes from payments made on behalf of Euclid, and it's $400,000 over the course of a year. And then the remaining balance comes from prisoner board and care and the sheriff's budget, and you'll see that better on the 2015 that you see here on the slide. I did leave a copy of this slideshow to Janine so she can distribute it to all of you. So in 15 right now, that will be our first year of the sheriff running the Euclid Jail project. For those of you guys that aren't familiar, it's just we run the jail that was formerly the responsibility of the Euclid Police Department. It's now run by the County Sheriff's Department, and we did about $600,000 worth of rehab to the facility. Of that, we're getting paid back from the city of Euclid in that agreement that we made with them. So within the first full year budget, it's about $1.6 million. Actually, the bulk of the budget is in personnel. The city of Euclid, over the course of 15, will reimburse us $400,000 for those operations, $850 from prisoner board and care, and $436 that's coming out of some efficiencies being had in the sheriff's budget. There will be, and I think the sheriff had mentioned at a previous meeting that we had with some of the leadership in council, that there's a possibility of a shortfall. It's too early to quantify that shortfall, but because it may be manageable. So on a month-by-month basis, the sheriff and his personnel will be monitoring that, and in particular the personnel and in utilities. The building was vacant for quite some time on the personnel side, and so we're not necessarily sure what the utilities are going to amount to over the course of a year. And so we're not ready at this point. The sheriff isn't to ask for an increase in that because it may be manageable. And the next slide, I think, will explain on why we believe there's a possibility of that being manageable. One of the reasons is we may be able to fit more people in it. Right now, he's managing on the weekends about an ADP of 60 folks. We think we can get up to 80, 83, and potentially even larger than that. And so the Euclid at the end of the year will be a balanced budget. However, because of the the complications we had at the start, it did affect our prisoner board and care budget. So the Euclid budget, we anticipate for 14 will be balanced. For 15, we're just going to have to play it, on a month-by-month basis. Prisoner board and care, that's the outsourcing of prisoners to surrounding jails when capacity in our county jail, and now actually capacity in our county jail or capacity in the Euclid jail aren't enough. And so that's what prisoner board and care is. 2012, it was 1.6. 2013, we were looking at 1.3 million. Prisoner ADP in 13 was 56, and that's an important number to remember. Right now, we still have a few months, but it's at 67. So when we negotiated originally the Euclid agreement, we did it based on the ADP being somewhere in the 56 range, but there was a spike this year. Because of that spike, it affected prisoner board and care for 14. And so prisoner board and care for 14 was about $1 million. We did move 283 to cover the few months from the Euclid revenue. So we moved that over to the Euclid budget. We did come back about a month ago to this council. We did receive a $600,000 increase in this budget. And we believe that right now we will land at about 1.3. That 600,000, it's important to understand. Had we been in a position to use Euclid at full capacity on August 1st, we still would have came back for more money because prisoner counts are high in the county. However, at that time, we would have came back for a slightly smaller amount, probably about half of that. So prisoner boarding care was high this year, and it's just one of those things that the sheriff monitors on a regular basis. So the 15 budget has it at $1 million. That's the current approved budget. 850 is coming from Euclid. Right now, prisoner boarding care will start at $186,000 for 15. And if ADP stays at around the 50 range, that's more than enough dollars. In fact, there's likely be a balance in that. If there's a significant increase in ADP, then there may be a need to come back for more. There's some things that the sheriff is working on that affect that. The Cleveland jail agreement happens, that may affect that. If the GPS monitoring that the sheriff is doing, if that works, that will allow us to do some significant savings. So there's some things that the sheriff wanted me to share with you. Really need to get through 12 months, and he's trying to make some efficiencies wherever he can. And then the last item is slated for Public Safety Committee tomorrow, the Cleveland Jail project. That one is as you can imagine, such a large project that I personally have been working on since February of 11. And it's something that the Public Safety Committee has been hearing for quite some time. And we'll have some more further discussions on it tomorrow. If and when that is passed, whether it's tomorrow or sometime in the near future, just keep in mind that there's a 9-month transition before we go live. And also, it's likely that Cleveland, although they passed an existing legislation, will likely have to go back and amend their legislation as well. So it's likely not even to start in January, February, March, somewhere in that range, because they will likely have to go back to council. I can answer, Mr. Chairman, anything that I can. Other than that, I can relay a lot of questions to the sheriff.
Okay. Chief, in the county sheriff's proposed budget update, under jail operations, there's an increase of $3,007,000 under controlled services. Can you explain what that increase is about?
I'm gonna have to defer to see if Donna or Chuck. I know part of it was some space maintenance issues. The Euclid jail was added to that as well, 1.7. I'm not turning around to see if I forgot anything else. Mr. Chairman, it is space maintenance.
And so the 2014 projection is 10 million, and the 2015 prior approved budget was 7 million. The proposed budget update is 3 million, so it's back to 10.3. So it basically takes it to the same level that you're currently operating at. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding.
Okay. Questions by my colleagues?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
question on the Euclid Jail. So are you saying, Director, that it's anticipated that for 2014, the Euclid Jail will break even?
Mr. Chairman, as a council member, it would, yes, we do expect it. We think most of the damage was done on prisoner boarding care. That's the part that increased.
And so, if I heard you correctly, what you're anticipating to do is to allow more prisoners. You said up to 80 in the 80s. It's currently slated for in the 60s. By putting more in there, up to 80, you'll be able to appropriate more board and care dollars to be able to generate the revenue to offset the previous losses. Is that how it'll be made up?
To offset the potential losses, or to balance the budget at the end of 15. Is that?
No, 14. So what are you doing for 14? You're projecting a break even?
Correct.
But we had, what, a $300,000 loss due to, I would argue, a shaky, if not mismanaged, implementation of the project. So how are we making that up in 14?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that we addressed that. Actually, we don't address how we're making that up. Right now, that was part of the $600,000 appropriation request that you're referring to that we already have currently in the budget, but 300 of that would have been correct because of the rocky start to the Euclid Jail project.
Okay, and the 100,000 of the IT, that's included in the 600,000 as well to reimburse the sheriff for those dollars that came out of that, what's that fund, it was his discretionary fund?
Correct. They did spend $100,000 in IT.
And how is that fund being replenished?
That fund is replenished on a daily basis, actually, through.
No, I'm sorry. As it relates to the use of that money, which was not contemplated for the Euclid Jail, how is that fund being replenished in support of the Euclid Jail?
Sure. My understanding, at least with discussing with the sheriff, that there is no intent to replenish that fund.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So, Chief, for 2015, do I have this correct that that prisoner board and care would have been $1,036,000, but you're expecting that $850,000 worth of prisoner care that otherwise would have had to be paid for by board and care would be handled by the Euclid Jail project, meaning that only $186,000 for prisoners being sent outside of the Cleveland or the Euclid systems will be required. Is that?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
That's the estimate. Okay. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. And next we go to Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas Juvenile Division.
Good afternoon. My name is Kristen Sweeney, and I am the administrative judge for the Cuyahoga County Juvenile Court. We did give you a packet that was distributed for you to look at. I'm going to keep my comments more general. I want to, first of all, thank you for your past support, and I also want to thank the Office of Budget and Management for their help, especially Wendy Fain, Chuck Cavano, and Chris Murray. We are good regarding our budget, except for two areas which we have discussed with you before, which are residential placements, and I also wanted to update you on detention services. The state of Ohio has been touting that it's good for youth in juvenile justice, in the juvenile justice system to be served in their communities rather than in state prison facilities. And so they have shut down 6 juvenile prisons. There are only 3 left, and none of them are for girls. The state says that the outcomes for the youth are better. What is not said is that the juvenile courts are then given a choice to put youth with severe problems or who pose significant public safety risks on probation or to put them in residential treatment facilities with local funding sources. The number of youth that are in residential treatment each month has risen 47% from the beginning of 2013. We were funded in 2014 and 2015 to provide residential treatment for 48 youth. We currently have 87 youth in residential treatment. We covered our 2014 residential budget deficit, which was $3.1 million internally, through contract decertification and with reallocation of our current funding. The juvenile court has been very careful and conservative in the past with our money, and we built up a rainy day fund. Right now, it's snowing. During our discussions from last fall and spring and our ongoing discussions with the Office of Budget and Management, we knew we would be here, and here we are. The other thing that I want to highlight is that the residential treatment provider per diems are increasing. The provider per diems have not seen an increase in their Medicaid reimbursements since 1996. The average per diem for all facilities will rise in 2004 about 3% to approximately $234 a day. In order to meet the increased need for residential services, the juvenile court is requesting an additional $2,850,000 in funding for calendar year 2015. This will meet the increased per diems of the residential treatment providers and meet the increased number of youth requiring residential treatment services.
Judge, did I get that right? 2,850,000?
Yes.
2,850,000, okay.
I also wanted to give you an update and discuss juvenile court detention services. And again, I want to thank you for meeting our staffing needs last spring. Since last spring, we have interviewed 112 applicants for new detention center positions. We've hired 13 new staff to meet those updated requirements. There are 14 vacancies in detention center staff right now, but we are processing 10 additional job offers. While the judges and magistrates have worked really hard to reduce the number of residents in our detention home, our overall numbers are still averaging to be in about the 150s and 60s on any given day. The number of residents who are either bindovers, meaning their cases are serious enough and they are old enough to be transferred into the adult system for trial, are particularly high in light of 2 gang prosecutions, one from the summer and one that was filed recently, which is on my docket, so I will not be discussing that case. We don't have any wiggle room in terms of cutting our population. In the spring, I was more hopeful that we would be able to get the population closer to 120. The population drives our overtime needs, and despite the hirings, we continue to have job vacancies in the detention center. The 12 additional staff were hired to reduce overtime and address safety concerns in the detention center, assuming a population of 120. However, with the gang prosecutions, and even prior to the gang prosecutions, we have not, in the past couple of years, since Senate Bill 337, been able to reach that population. That law has changed our population. If our population is regularly 160 and we are only funded for 120, we are not able to substantially impact those overtime numbers the way we wanted to. This morning, we had 163 residents in the detention center. 25 of those residents have been bound over, meaning they are going to be tried as adults, or they are over 18 years of age. 19 are awaiting placements as their cases have already been disposed of by the court. And 20 are in the detention center for the most recent gang prosecution. So the judges and magistrates, of which there are 12 total, have 97 cases with residents with open cases that are not bindovers, adults, awaiting residential placement, or part of gang prosecutions. And so looked at this way, we've actually done really well in getting our numbers below 120. I should note that the 20 youth in the detention center who have been bound over to stand trial as adults, or who are in fact adults, could not be in the community. Prior to 337, they would have been housed in the county jail, so the costs of their incarceration would not have disappeared. They just would not have shown up on our budget. They would have shown up in the county jail budget. We currently have in the detention center a 19-year-old charged with murder and 2 12-year-olds and a number of 13-year-olds. This is not an ideal situation. The residents in the detention center present a variety of issues and a variety of public safety risks. We have been trying to develop new ways to divert people out of the detention center, and we currently have a grant for a pilot project in the 4th Police District to put youth charged with domestic violence in foster homes for short periods rather than automatically admitting them into the detention center. This program is being overseen by Beachbrook. We are also trying to develop a secure shelter care program, and we are requesting $500,000 for this project. We have been using Carrington Youth Academy and Cleveland Christian Home for shelter care. However, both of them are only staff secure. which means that if a youth decides they're just going to walk out, it's not locked, so they can do that. We need a facility where we can safely house younger, less dangerous youth in a more secure way than we currently have, which is not as secure as the detention center. I also want to highlight that we have not been able to put a final price tag on the 2 gang prosecutions because they are still actively moving their way through the juvenile system. And this is a new type of case. It is my understanding it is the first in the country for juvenile law. It is an extremely innovative kind of prosecution. It will create and is creating expenses which we have not encountered before. And these costs include detention expenses, assigned counsel and guardian ad litem fees, costs for psychological evaluations that are required for discretionary bindovers by law, and transportation and security costs. So we don't have a number as to what these prosecutions are going to cost us, but I am going to just lay that out that exists right now so that you are aware of it. And as I believe the next item on the agenda is the prosecutor's office, it seems like a nice segue, so I'm going to stop here. I want to thank you for your time and consideration this afternoon. I speak for all of us at Juvenile Court when I say we really appreciate it, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Judge Sweeney, in our presentation from the director on the proposed budget, it says here that the juvenile court was increased by $3.9 million for 2015 for the purposes of detention center overtime, shelter pilot, and placement contracts. I would like if you could explain a little bit about what each of these are, and then to explain whether any of this $3.9 million includes what you were requesting.
It all is, that's what it is. Right? I mean, that money that you are talking about, that's what I just laid out.
Okay, so what the director has requested covers what you're proposing. You're not requesting additional money above what's in the proposed
No,
update.
absolutely not.
Okay.
I'm explaining why we are requesting it. And also, we have made all of these discussions have been ongoing with Office of Budget and Management since last spring. I really can't emphasize how helpful they have been for us in working together to make realistic proposals for the council.
Emergency reported in the building. Please evacuate the building by the nearest exit. Do not use the elevators.
That's all we need.